David and Mina Swan were married in 1999. David had 4 children from a previous marriage, while Mina had 3. By September of 2018, they had been married for almost 2 decades.
During those 19 years together, the couple had been extremely active. They had even visited Iceland and Alaska in their 70s. They had an upcoming trip to Norway planned. At this point in time, David was 88 and Mina was 80. Mina was even riding roller coasters throughout her 70s with her grandkids. A neighbor called them the youngest 80-somethings on the planet.
They lived in this neighborhood in Clearwater, Florida at the time.
They had a garden in their backyard. They loved to garden as well. They grew vegetables, turnips, greens, stuff like that. And they would hand them out. They'd go around the neighborhood just giving them out to neighbors for free. Everyone in this neighborhood seemed to think that they were just a wonderful couple. And yet, at the end of September 2018, they were both found murdered inside of their house in this neighborhood. This case has not been solved to this day. This is Twisted Crimes.
David was a certified public accountant who moved here to Clearwater, Florida in the early 1980s to set up a tax practice. Mina's first husband died in 1998 and David was divorced. Mina had lived in this home for about 40 years when she died. When David married her, he moved into the house as well. It was the second marriage for each of them. Mina's daughter, Noelle Devine, said they enjoyed doing a lot of things together, including dancing.
In 2002, David, using the trail name Twinkle Toes, completed the entire Appalachian Trail. Mina, using the trail name Artsy, completed about half of it with him. David even wrote a 274-page book about their adventures. We'll put a link to it below. David had his private pilot license and loved to fly his family all over the United States, including to the Grand Canyon, Louisiana, and Missouri. They also traveled around the world, going to such places as Argentina, China, Europe, Chile, Australia, and many other places where they enjoyed birdwatching together. In addition to all of that, they had an RV, which they had driven to 48 states, including Alaska. When they weren't traveling, they enjoyed spending some of their time at a local astronomy club they were members of, and David had recently become a Ruby Life Master at bridge. Mina spent time cooking, reading, sewing, and doing artwork. David enjoyed scuba diving, fishing, dancing, writing, sailing, and many other things. It's crazy how active they were considering their age. They were more active than most people who were half their age. David was also a businessman who even co-founded a community bank at one point. The 7 children they had between the two of them had blessed them with many grandchildren. They would sometimes host New Year's Eve parties at their home and invite all their neighbors. They were close to many of their neighbors, including Joel Locke, who lived across the street from them for many years. Joel told Bay News 9 he last saw David and Mina on Thursday, September 27, 2018. He said on Friday he noticed a new phone book and a newspaper outside their house. Then on Saturday he looked over and noticed another newspaper had been added to the pile. At that point, he became worried and contacted Mina's daughter, Noelle Devine. Noelle came over and met Joel. Then the two of them walked over to the house and found an unlocked door, which they opened and then entered the house. Inside, they saw a horrific sight. Joel said, "I walked through the kitchen, and you could smell the food that was still sitting on the counter that had been prepped for dinner. She was face down, and he was on his back. She was on one side of the coffee table, he was on the other side. Noelle could not handle it. She ran out the door, and I was with her, right behind. David and Mina had each been shot multiple times. Detectives have not said what type of weapon was used or how many rounds were fired. They have also not publicly speculated on whether the murders were committed by one or more people. There were no calls of gunshots or any other disturbances in the area in the days leading up to the discovery. Police believe they may have been dead for a couple of days by the time they were discovered. Forensic teams worked the scene for 3 days, and detectives made extensive efforts to secure surveillance footage from the neighborhood. However, the motive behind the killings remains undisclosed. police are convinced this was a targeted crime, not a random act. There were no signs of forced entry and no signs that this was a robbery. Police said there is no evidence of anything being stolen. Police analyzed more than 300 pieces of evidence. They also brought in state and federal labs for further examination. Interviews with more than 100 people have yielded some valuable leads. Trace DNA evidence, meaning a small amount, was found at the scene. Police have also interviewed relatives, friends, and business partners of the Swans. Forensic expert Jennifer Shin analyzed the case on Court TV. She said law enforcement would want to conduct a comprehensive scene reconstruction. Their objectives would be to look at several critical aspects. First, they would want to locate and examine the fired cartridge cases from the scene. Next, they would work on figuring out how many people were involved in the shooting. Then, the investigation would try to pinpoint the positions of both the shooters and the victims during the incident. Next, investigators would work to figure out whether one or more firearms were used in the incident. Next, they would want to determine the location of the shooter or shooters. The distance between the shooter or shooters and the victims would be a key factor of interest. Additionally, these cartridge cases would be cross-referenced with an extensive database of such cases to identify if the same firearm had been used in any other criminal incidents. Notably, a relatively new technique involves extracting DNA from fired cartridge cases, which can provide valuable forensic evidence. Furthermore, it's important to note that DNA databases may contain genetic profiles from unknown sources, potentially finding connections to unsolved cases. It would seem to us at least that no matches to other cases have been found in this case. Police continue to say this was a targeted murder and that the public is not in danger. If they would have found DNA links to other cases, then they would not be able to make those statements. Lastly, investigators would also take into account that there is no evidence suggesting a forced break-in. However, this possibility cannot be ruled out, especially if the incident occurred during daylight hours.
2 years after the murders, police held a press conference and released a little bit of evidence they had, which included these 7 pictures we are showing you now. At the time, they said they didn't want to release more at that point in time due to concerns about compromising the ongoing investigation. Detectives said hopefully someone will see something of significance in these images that had eluded them to that point. It's hard to tell what police are hoping to get out of releasing these pictures. There simply isn't much to see in the photos. But let's spend a moment looking through them.
To me, the most interesting picture is this one that shows an SUV in the driveway. What's interesting about it is the sunshade is hanging down on the driver's side. Just speculating here, but it's possible one or both of the Swans was in the vehicle trying to put the sunshade into place when the murderer or murderers walked up and forced them out of the vehicle and into the house at gunpoint, and that would explain the lack of forced entry. This picture shows the newspapers stacked up. However, they are not at the front door. Instead, they are next to the garage, which seems like a strange place for them to be. If the newspaper delivery person walked up the driveway, then why go drop the newspapers off in front of the garage? Why not just walk over to the front door? It would be interesting to know if this is where they were normally dropped off at. But if we take a moment and go back to the previous picture, it looks like police actually moved some of the newspapers before taking the other picture for some reason, because it appears there are newspapers spread out a bit in the background of this picture. Not really sure why they would have moved anything around at the crime scene before taking the pictures.
I'm not sure what the point is of this picture except to show the address. This picture is interesting because the mailbox dolphin flag is up, but the top piece of mail inside is addressed to Mr. David Swan. So not sure why the police released a picture showing the flag up.
Yeah, it's strange because if the Swans put mail into their mailbox after the mailman came by on Friday, then that outgoing mail could still be inside the mailbox. Why would the flag still be up though if the mail carrier had already stopped by, picked up the outgoing mail, and dropped off the Swans' mail? Perhaps the murderer or murderers put the flag up to make it look like the Swans were still alive and well and to buy themselves some time. But if that happened, why were the newspapers and phone books still here? Perhaps that was an oversight by the killer or killers.
Next, there's this picture of a Lincoln MKX inside the garage. We've looked closely at it, but we don't see anything interesting about it. The final two pictures show the pool area. Perhaps police are hoping a friend or family member will see a pot has been moved, that maybe a key was hidden under, or something like that. Again, not much to see in those two pictures unless you know how things were set up before the murders.
At that press conference, Lieutenant Michael Walick said he is not prepared to label this as a cold case, but rather an unsolved mystery he is determined to crack. Walick said at the time that there were many unknowns and multiple theories under consideration, including financial motives, but they are certain that the Swans were targeted. He said, 100% this was not a random act.
David's daughter Julie Swan said, "It's pretty scary that there is a murderer out on the streets who probably knows who we are, but we don't know who he or she is." In November of 2018, Outfront Media was kind enough to donate space on multiple billboards around town, mentioning a reward being offered of $25,000 and asking, "Who killed David and Mina Swan?" The billboards were put up in what police called high-traffic locations in the area.
Imagine yourself being one of the people who lived in this neighborhood at the time. Police are telling you everything is okay. There's no need to worry. But two elderly people were just murdered in their home in your neighborhood. Joel Locke said, "I can't sleep, can't eat, can't stop thinking about it. It's just a nightmare we can't wake up from." More than 2 months after the murders, News Channel 8 sent a reporter here to talk to some of the neighbors. It was obvious the murders were still the main topic of discussion in the neighborhood.
Jan Smith, who lived in the neighborhood for 17 years at the time, said, "Whenever I run into a neighbor, it is always what we start with. Well, have you heard anything? Do you know anything?" She also said the case was the first thing discussed at the monthly community meetings for each of the past 2 months. She said one of the hardest things to deal with was the lack of updates from police. No suspects had been named, and police were barely releasing any information other than to say the community was safe. There has been a lot of fighting over money between family members since the murders. ABC Action News found that on July 30th, 2019, Noelle Devine filed a lawsuit acting as the plaintiff, representing the estate of Mina Swan. Her legal action was directed against her stepbrother, Stephen Swan, who is a representative of David Swan's estate. Essentially, the lawsuit contended that the couple's shared bank account was subject to misuse by David Swan. It also says that David did not fulfill his financial commitments to his wife, as stipulated in a promissory note.
In that note, signed by David, written on December 23, 2006, David wrote, "Effective immediately. If you do not renew our homeowner's insurance that is due February 13, 2007, I give you my word of honor that I will personally pay for any damages, losses, or other costs due to you having no insurance on our home. This pledge covers any losses from hurricanes, fires, or any other damages that would normally be covered by having homeowners insurance. I ask that you take my check for $3,500, put it into some sort of savings account or certificate of deposit, and hold it for an indefinite period. I will add to the account another $3,500 next new year and every new year thereafter. If we have any losses that would normally be covered by insurance, the cost of such losses would come from the savings account to the extent possible. If there are any excess needs, I personally will cover the cost." Not sure why the Swans decided to cancel their home insurance. Perhaps they thought by just putting the money aside they would be spending on insurance each year, then it would likely save them money over time. Stephen Swan strongly refuted the allegations in the lawsuit. He said, "It's completely bogus. It's not based on fact. My father kept separate finances from his wife. The fighting was over about $500,000, and that money was tied up in the lawsuit." A person who was confirmed by Websleuths to be a family member of David and Mina said on the site on April 4, 2022, "Actually, David S. Swan Jr.'s estate is closed, and Noelle's bogus lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Mina Swan's estate is still open and had an administrator ad litem appointed by the court over a year ago. Courts rarely do that. Makes you wonder what she was up to, don't you think?" Stephen lives in Illinois, but but he told ABC Action News that he travels back to Florida once a year to meet with detectives and try to keep the case in the minds of the public. Police are still trying to figure out who killed David and Mina, and they need help from the public. Whalek made clear the importance of even the smallest piece of information, saying, "Somebody out there knows something, whether it's small to them or big. We need anybody that knows anything to come forward." As far as we know, there is still a $53,000 reward for anyone who comes forward with information that leads to an arrest and conviction in this case. $50,000 is from the family, and the rest is from Crime Stoppers.
Now we're going to tell you what our opinion is. I really agree with the son. I think whoever committed the murders was someone who would have benefited from the inheritance.
I agree with you. In this situation, it's very strange to have 80-year-olds. Police say they were targeted. Now, who's going to target someone in their 80s besides someone who benefits in some way? You could see a botched robbery, perhaps, but that doesn't appear to be the case at all in this situation, because police say nothing was stolen from the home at the time the murders were committed. So you have to start looking at, well, who benefits financially from these people not being around anymore? And that's where the police should be looking in this situation. I'm sure they are looking at those possibilities, and hopefully they'll be able to solve this soon for the sake of family members, friends, neighbors, and everyone who wants to see this resolved. Plus, it's got to be kind of nerve-wracking for people in this neighborhood. Police say it was targeted, but you never know for sure. And a murderer or murderers are on the loose, and who knows where they are. If you have any information at all that may help the police, we're going to put some contact info down below. Thanks for watching. We hope you'll join us next time.
Thank you for remembering her. I also want to add my thanks to the tremendous efforts on behalf of everyone who's worked hard to try to find out what's happened to my mother and to David Swan. It's extremely important to us as a family. We have kids. We have grandkids. They were her family. She loved them dearly. There's nothing more difficult than trying to explain to a child what happened. It's hard enough for us as adults to handle this. I can't imagine the tough conversations we've had to have, how those continue over the years. So we are looking very, very much for answers. We know that there's answers out there. We know that. We know someone out there knows something, and I hope they'll share that information. It's extremely important to us. We wanted the reward out there as a reminder that Mom was loved and very much missed. And now, the one thing that could help, the one thing that could help is finding the answers to what happened. So please, if anyone knows something, if anyone hears anything, if they've seen anything, please call the tip line. It's very important. Don't hold back. We would really love to find the answers in this case. We would like to have our peace. Thank you.
If you have any information regarding this case, you are urged to contact Clearwater Police at 727-562-4141 or email tips@myclearwater.com.